Welcome to tonight's At the Table program, Building a Better Spice Trade with Sana Javeri Kadri. We're going to drop Sana's spicy Kadak chai recipe in the chat, so please take this time to gather your supplies and your ingredients so you're ready to cook alongside her when she starts. And just a reminder, I think you got the chai recipe also in your confirmation email if you have that up. My name is Triana Patel, and I am the manager for youth and family public programs with the education department here at the Asian Art Museum. And I will be hosting tonight's program, which would not have been possible without the incredible hard work of my colleague Indra Mungal, who oversees the At the Table series. On behalf of the Asian Art Museum, I would like to welcome you to today's virtual program and thank you for your support. The museum is open again, and I invite you to join us. Please see our website to learn about our fantastic current and upcoming exhibitions. So before we begin the program, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. The Asian Art Museum condemns racism, hate, xenophobia in all its forms. We call for an end to anti-Black and anti-Asian violence and commit ourselves as partners and allies in fighting for social justice. We pledge to uplift the voices and experiences of marginalized communities and to confront prejudice and injustice through the power of art and education. There's still much more work to be done, and we will continue to make diversity, equity, access, and inclusion institutional priorities as we strive to make the museum truly a place for all. And though Pride Month technically ended yesterday, here at the museum, we celebrate all year round by continuing to highlight the voices of the LGBT community. And so we're so excited to have Sana with us today. For tonight's program, Sana Javeri Kadri, who is here today, Sana, wave hi to everyone, will share a mini history of the spice industry, including how it looked when it was created centuries ago and how today not much has changed. She'll also be making her spicy Kadak chai recipe. So again, reminder, if you're just joining us, please gather your ingredients and supplies for making your chai right now. The traditional spice trade has prioritized high volume and profits at the expense of taste. Diaspora Co.'s mission is creating change within a stale system by building a better spice trade. From small Indian farms to your kitchen, Sana will talk about heirloom seed varieties and their constant collaboration with partner farms to curate only the most delicious spices grown for flavor first. Equity is at the heart of her work, paying partner farms an average of 6 times the market price for their produce. Sana and Diaspora Co. recognizes that the commodity food system is broken and that as leaders in sustainability and regenerative agriculture, their partner farms deserve a rich premium, as well as harvest advances and full healthcare for all their laborers. So I want to introduce you to Sana. Sana is the founder of Diaspora Co., a direct trade spice company working towards a radically equitable, sustainable, and more delicious spice supply chain. Born and raised in Mumbai, India, amidst a big family of idealists and architects, she has over a decade of experience in every facet of the food industry and supply chain, from farm worker to line cook to marketing consultant. Sana founded Diaspora Co. in 2017, and it has quickly become a nationally acclaimed, beloved food brand that will support over 150 small Indian farm partners and over 1,000 land laborers by the end of 2021, and aims to set a new standard for what equity in our food system can look like. So, and then Sana currently lives between Mumbai, India and Oakland, California, though today she's in New York. So, Sana, we'd love you to take it away.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. That was wonderful. I'm currently in my little brother's kitchen in New York, so I promise these are not my decor choices behind me. I think the first thing that I wanted to jump into is that if anybody's cooking along and you have questions about the ingredients, so maybe you have uh, powdered cinnamon instead of whole cinnamon, or you don't have fresh ginger and you want to use dried ginger, go ahead and drop your questions into the comments and I'll try to address, any swaps you want to make with your chai. I will say that this chai recipe is very personal to me. And I think in general, what I want to lead with is that chai is a personal thing to 1.5 billion people across South Asia. All of our aunties and dadis and nannies make it differently. I make it differently from the way my nanny did. So this is just my rendition. And it's rooted in, flavors that I like. But I think the magic of chai, and then I'll get into like why this is so rooted in the history, that like the magic of it is making it your own and like finding the mix of spices that works for you. So if you want to do less cinnamon, more cinnamon, you can't not make it spicy. That's my only commandment to you, is that it has to be spicy, and I'll explain why in a minute. um Triana, do you want to jump straight into the cooking of things?
Yeah, let's start with the cooking, and then I can look for questions in the chat and I'll read them to you while you're cooking so you can keep chatting. If there's something you'd like to talk about first before
Yeah,
questions come, feel free to start that while you're cooking.
yeah. So the I guess I'll give you a little bit of history of how chai came to be so wrapped up into South Asian identity, which is that um, tea was not really traditionally consumed in South Asia at all, up until the 1800s. And it was really the British who introduced tea into India, where they realized that the Chinese had a monopoly on tea production and they wanted to undercut that. And so they smuggled tea saplings into India, which was a colony of the British Empire at the time, and essentially forced landowners and laborers all over the country, but primarily in the northeast of Assam, to begin growing tea. And initially, for the first 50 or so years when tea production began in India, it was just being exported back for Her Royal Highness the Queen, and her constituents. And they were making good money doing that because they could control the cost of labor. They could basically control all of their cost of goods. But then, the wily little fellas that they were like, well, how do we increase demand? And they figured that if they could get, similar to opium in China, if they could get the entire subcontinent hooked onto tea, um, they would not only have built-in supply, but also built-in demand. So like economic genius in the form of like oppression and imperialism. And so what they did is that any British factory and any British railway station was suddenly mandated to have chai breaks. So the trains would stop at stations for mandated tea breaks, not chai breaks, tea breaks. And all British factories would have mandated tea breaks. The workers were only too happy to get, a 10-minute break in an otherwise very long day. But often the workers were pretty turned off and put off by this kind of strange brew of leaves. And so that's where the historic origins of kind of brewing spices from Ayurveda was applied, and almost like the queen's tea was bastardized with milk, sugar, and spices, supposedly, legend has it, by the chai valas, which means the chai people, at the railway stations, to make the kind of passing passengers like it more, and kind of, so in a way the creation of chai was a evolution of a system of oppression, so that it could be desirable and delicious to the South Asian palate. So we took something that was, a marker of colonization, and made it our own, and now it's inextricable from our identities. So I think that's what I mean, that chai is personal. It's for all of us, but I think, like with all things, it's important to know the origins and know what it was rooted in. And that's why I say it has to be spicy. If it's just tea, milk, and sugar, it doesn't count. We need the spices for it to be chai. So I'm going to go over all of the ingredients. So these are my whole spices here. Can y'all see that? Yeah, there we go. So we have black pepper. My company has a blend that we source from a wonderful farm that's called aranya, and it's some wild varieties of pepper. That's Baraka cardamom, which is also a wild cardamom that was domesticated by one of our farm partners, so that it could be grown pesticide free. Candian cloves from Sri Lanka, which are like nice and plump, and then some fennel that I got from the Indian grocery store because we don't yet source fennel. So these are whole. I would recommend smashing the cardamom a little bit. You can either do that with the flat side of your knife, or I'm gonna tilt it back up to me, um, or you could put it into a mortar and pestle, whatever you have. Um, in the recipe, I had mentioned uh, fresh ginger or and a whole cinnamon stick. I don't have either right now, so I'm using cinnamon powder. I'm using Ceylon cinnamon. If you're using cassia, which is a different bark, but what more Americans know as cinnamon, that's much stronger. So use a bit less than I'm going to use. So I'm going to use a teaspoon. If you're using cassia, go lower. Otherwise, it's really going to hit you in the head. Um, and then I'm using our new Makir ginger and some janky packaging because I only had a sample. But if you're using fresh ginger, I'm using powdered dry ginger. If you're using fresh ginger, there's an enzyme in fresh ginger that curdles milk. So if you're using Oatly or almond milk or something, do not heed this. But if you're using fresh ginger, you want to bring your milk to a boil right about now. So if you're putting fresh ginger into boiling milk, you should be okay. But if you put fresh ginger into cold milk, you'll cause the milk to curdle. So with fresh ginger, I said 12 slices because that creates something really, really spicy and nice. And I did also say that dry ginger doesn't work as well here. And that was before I sourced a dry ginger. I promise this is better and worth it. So I'm going to do, if you're using dry ginger for any reason, I'm doing a teaspoon of that. So 1 teaspoon of the cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon powder, and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon ginger powder. I'm going to start with getting my saucepan, adding some water to it. I believe what I have on here is a cup of water. Give me 1 second. So I'm going to put that cup of water to boil. Hold, please. So putting the cup of water to boil, if you did want your chai to be like really milky and strong, you can skip the 1 cup of water and just start with 1 cup of milk. So I'm gonna go pretty high heat because I want it to get boiling really quickly. And what I'm about to explain in terms of so the ideal cup of chai, like what my absolute par excellence, though I don't get to this every day, is something that's really creamy and that coats your tongue. And there's a few ways that you get that like tongue coating texture. One is using an unrefined sugar. So in this case, I have a block of jaggery here that I got from the Indian store that I've like shaved into some shavings that you see right there. Date syrup works just as well. Palm sugar, which I think is like piloncillo. I don't know how to say it, but any sugar that's not fully refined. But it's also not the end of the world if you just have white sugar. Like sweet is good regardless. And then the other thing that gets you that texture on your tongue is you bring it to a boil, you lower it to a simmer. You bring it to a boil, you lower it to a simmer. So I describe good chai making in terms of heat as a sine curve, because you're going like this 3 times until you get to the desired texture. And that also means you're really giving the spices and the milk a chance to kind of meld together and really infuse. Most spices are activated in the presence of heat and a fat. So in this case, the milk acts as your fat and then heat. So that's what's allowing the kind of active compounds of your spices to come out and flavor your milk. If there are questions so far, slide them into my DMs. uh, which is my millennial way of saying the chat. Um, so I have my water, it's simmering, it's gonna get to a boil pretty quickly. And so the first spices that I'm gonna add in are my whole spices. Um, and in this case, because I have powder, I will add those in later because those will kind of provide flavor so quickly. So I want to give the whole spices that I just mentioned a little bit of a head start on things. So I'm going to stick it in now. And in terms of how I learned to make chai, I did grow up in Mumbai. I did grow up, so my nanny would make chai every afternoon. She would, I only knew her when she was kind of a semi-retired doctor. So she would go to the clinic in the morning and then come home for lunch. I would come back from school and we would eat lunch together and then she'd take a short nap and then she'd have her very, very stiff cup of chai that would power her through enough energy to get back to the hospital and, you know, finish her day as a doctor. And so my memory was that she would have her cup and then there would be a little saucepan that the, you know, the cup was in, and she would pour a little bit of chai into the saucepan for me. And I had to like hold it like this and blow on it and then slowly drink it like a cat. So my memory of it is like drinking chai is like sipping it out of the saucepan. Um, but then, so nobody taught me how to make chai. You know, actually, it's kind of discouraged in terms of children consuming chai because it has caffeine in it. Like Triana, you were saying, kids' chai is just spices and milk. Um, so it was very much like a trial and error over years of being homesick and figuring out what the chai was that worked for me. So my pot is now, my water is boiling pretty vigorously, or I guess that would be a simmer, a vigorous simmer. Um, and what's nice is that you'll immediately see the cardamom pods rehydrating, kind of puffing up into little flotation devices. And that's good because in a couple more minutes, they'll absorb water and they'll sink again. And that's when you know that the cardamom is kind of infusing into your water. And I'm gonna measure out my powdered spices. Yeah, but Tiana, hit me with questions as
Yeah,
they come.
there are no questions in the chat yet, but I have a couple for you to get you started. Earlier, when you were talking a little bit about the history of chai, you talked a little bit how it was, you know, rooted in oppression and kind of created from this really awful situation that now is so tied to our identities. Can you talk a little bit more about Diaspora's mission to really build a better spice trade, because decolonizing has a whole nother meaning? And can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yes, very much. That's kind of bread and butter. But so I moved to this country. I'm gonna grab a spoon and then come back in 2 seconds. Um, so I moved to the US 8 years ago for college, and I actually wrote my thesis about the impact of colonialism on Indian agriculture. And I was really trying to understand, you know, what changed due to colonialism. Because honestly, in my childhood in Mumbai, we were told like, oh, colonialism was like kind of bad, but they gave us trains and we speak English now. So it wasn't that bad. And that was very much kind of the British schools that we went to, you know, the Anglo teachers that we had. Um, so that was what we were told, and we weren't taught about what systemically was stripped of South Asia due to colonialism. Also, this is boiling, so I'm lowering it down to a simmer. I'm gonna let it simmer for a couple minutes, and then I'll raise it back up to a boil. So, and if y'all are watching your stoves or nervous about your stoves, there is a good trick, which is you can put a wooden spoon on top, and like the surface tension of the wooden spoon on top of the saucepan will prevent it from boiling over. I don't have a wooden spoon right now though. And there's a question in the Q&A box. What is your stance on boiling uncovered? The water boils faster. Interesting cue. Um, I don't know. I think we Indians are such visual people. Like anything about like a watched kettle, we watch our kettles very deeply. So I wonder if it's just that we want to see what's happening. Um, so it's been, I hope that answers the question. I don't have like a scientific answer to it. I have like an emotional response. But I'm gonna add my sweetener at this point because adding the sweetener in so that it has enough time to boil and simmer and boil and simmer also gives you that like nice caramely texture. So my tiny bit of jaggery, it's not a tiny bit, I'm actually putting an obnoxious amount of jaggery in here. Um, I believe that chai should be sweet, but and more like dessert, but that's just me. Um, but yeah, I think I came to the US and I started researching colonialism, and I was appalled that this wasn't taught to me in my childhood. And the more I studied, the more I had a sneaky suspicion that, if what the British did, which is, and I say the British, but it's actually, we go back through the history of the spice trade. Spices have been traded from the coasts of India for about 1,000 years, but they have been traded under colonialism only for about 400. So, boats were moving from the west coast of India across the Middle East, and to Yemen very, very, very long time ago. Um, but it was only starting in the 14 and 1500s that the Portuguese, the Dutch, and then the British made contact, and each established their own. 1 second, is boiling. Their own initially companies, and actually, I often describe the East India Company, which was the initial corporation that then gave way to the British Raj, as and I think this is an accurate representation, as the original venture capital, because it was the original, like, you put in capital and then you see a 500x return. So pepper was kind of like the Facebook of 400 years ago, um, and that was primarily done by the Europe didn't have spices and didn't have access to spices. And a lot of people say, oh, they needed it to get through the winter. And like, that's not really true. Yes, I'm sure it helped them have a tastier winter and not just consume, dried bits of beef jerky. But the main thing was that spices allowed Europeans, and I'm including England and Britain in that, but allowed them to have a status symbol. So spices were actually the original like luxury food. And pepper was traded similar to the way a priceless piece of art would be traded now, or the way that a Louis Vuitton handbag would be bought and sold. In that there was scarcity around where it came from. People didn't fully understand how it grew. Traders often told people that they had to extract pepper from like trees that were guarded by snakes, and they had to like trance the snakes in order, or hypnotize the snakes in order to access the pepper, like all kinds of tall tales in order to justify and jack up the price. At this point, I'm going to add my cup of milk, in like true Indian style. I'm going to eyeball it, and then we're going to start tasting. It's not open. So if you look at recipes from the late 1700s and the early 1800s out of Venice and the UK, you'll see that their use of spices is kind of absurd. So, for example, there's an old Venetian cookbook that talks about a goose that's studded with 1,000 cloves. Like, that's not tasty, but it's a status symbol. It's like one hell of a showstopper to bring in the clove-studded goose. To look at how much cash I have. Very similar to how landholders who could afford to have, land be empty instead of be grown on, that was a symbol of wealth. It was spices were quite simply a symbol of wealth. And the way that they did that is often requiring farmers to both grow it, pay very, very hefty taxes on it, and then sell it to traders who, were all middlemen of the Raj, or of the empire, at very low prices. So the system was set up such that at, at some point in the middle of the 1800s, I believe, there's records of 300x profits on pepper, which is what I mean on, Pepper being the original tech company, or not tech, but you know what I mean. And from there onwards, eventually, as we know, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan were able to gain independence, very hard fought. And at that point, you would think that, like, wow, the spice trade was dismantled and a better system was built in, like, in the new countries. And unfortunately, what happened is that that system was very profitable. So a lot of the traders, and the trading classes of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, simply took over where the British left off. And so when I set out to research the spice trade in 2017, that's what I discovered. That actually Gujarati traders, and I'm Gujarati, so my own people, had kind of taken over exactly where the British had left off. I'm just gonna taste this and see where it's at, because it's now been simmering for a while. Actually, it's looking like the perfect color to me. And if yours isn't this color, it's likely because I used jaggery. So it's like a milky, here, let me stir it. You see that? It's like a dark, it's like a cafe au lait. And actually, at this point is when I would add in the black tea. Because it's 9:30 or 10 p.m. in New York right now, I'm not going to add the black tea. The black tea that I have was just these, like, very straightforward tea bags from, the Indian store. My advice here is use the cheapest black tea you have. Again, the reason that folks were, oh, my chai boils over frequently, maybe that's why. No, but it's true. Yeah, but the reason that so often, folks were adding spices and sugar and milk is because we were being sold the cheapest tea, like the beautiful first and second flushes were going to England. And so we were being left with the tiny chopped up leftover bits, that we needed to brew also intensely like this to make it really strong. So the magic of chai is that it's not an elitist drink, though my choice of using 12 cardamom pods is a little bit elitist, given how expensive cardamom is, but
And Sana, there's a question in the Q&A box. I'm going to read it to you, okay? When Starbucks introduced their chai tea latte in the 1990s, I was too young to explain to my friends what cultural appropriation was and why I felt weird about this. How do you feel about the popularity of chai and golden milk in American cafes?
Oh, queuing me up for such a feisty question. Thank you, whoever that was. One second, I'm going to try this first. Ooh, I'm very pleased with myself. So I'm going to add a little bit more jaggery and a little bit more ginger, just because I want it to be a bit zingier. And then I'm going to come back to our question at hand. I quite literally started my company because I saw the golden milk trend, and I found it to be, I'll just say, odd. I didn't grow up in this country, right? So I didn't have the very traumatic experience that I know a lot of Indian American folks had of having their food and their culture being made fun of. And so I deeply understood this Indian American feeling of, like, excuse me, now you like our stuff? But I hadn't experienced it myself. So I was more just like, what? Y'all are into haldi doodh? Like, I did golden milk or haldi doodh. I hated that growing up. It was disgusting. But y'all are paying $8 for it in SF now. I think my point of interacting with that phenomenon, and I think you were right, I probably didn't have the language to differentiate between appropriation and appreciation. But luckily, my line of inquiry took me to, okay, if people in America are consuming this, how do I make sure that, or can I even look into making sure that Indian farmers are making as much money off of this trend as possible? And, like, some in the comment section of munchies.com have called that racist. I don't think that's racist. I think that's ensuring that like a trend is benefiting the culture that it comes from. And so my journey into starting Diaspora in 2017 was about going back to India and cold calling turmeric farms and saying, you know, are you growing organic turmeric? Are you growing organic turmeric? Like, who are you selling to? I called Oaktown Spice Shop, which is a spice shop in the Bay Area, and said, you know, where are you getting your turmeric from? And John Beaver, who's the owner, who's a lovely man, was like, honestly, I have no idea. So if you find out, let me know. And I was like, I'm a 23-year-old punk and you're asking me? And you know, we now Diaspora Co sells to Oaktown Spice Shop. So we have truly come full circle. But I felt that if I could source the most ethical, sustainable, beautiful turmeric out there and make sure that Gwyneth Paltrow was consuming that turmeric, then and could explain that, you know, there's an origin to this, there's a culture that this comes from, and I want you to know that story when you consume it, then it would transform into appreciation instead of appropriation. And it was about education, and about making that education as exciting and sexy and tantalizing to the customer as possible. And you know, in a nutshell, I think that's what my company has done for the past 5 years. Like our job is to make the revolution look good. Or like I often say, like I want to make supply chain sexy again. But I think when it comes to the Starbucks chai, I find it so nasty. And luckily, I think people are swing up to realizing that it doesn't taste good. And that real chai tastes better. I find David Rio's chai to also be frankly quite terrible. I find that there are not very many places in SF where I get delicious chai. Also because most of that chai is, I want to like clarify here, I'm not saying white people shouldn't make chai. White people are welcome to make chai. They must. It's a delicious thing. Food is made to be shared and consumed by us all and enjoyed. And like, I make turmeric pasta, you know, that's, but I think it's just important to understand the origin and not claim credit for something you didn't invent. Like my irritation with Gwyneth Paltrow was that she was almost claiming that like golden milk lattes were her creation. And I feel a certain satisfaction knowing that she now consumes our turmeric and has been schooled otherwise. Does that, I feel like that answers the question.
That does, yeah. Thanks, Sana. I also did not like Healthy Dude when I was growing up, and my mom still thinks that I should drink it, but I don't love it. There's another question in the Q&A box. Can canned coconut milk serve as a substitute to milk?
Yeah, it could. I mean, I would say that the coconut milk would provide a very strong flavor. Oh my God, the waft of chai steam is pretty amazing right now. I used Oatly. I know Oatly is bad for you and has a lot of palm oil in it, and I understand. Like you could absolutely use coconut. I think you should know that it would be pretty overpowering flavor. I have recently started playing with pistachio milk, and it doesn't have any added oil or like soy lecithin or anything. It's just plain pistachios and water. So I highly recommend that. Macadamia milk is another good one. But yeah, give it a try. Tell us what you think, how it tastes. My chai is ready. I'm gonna show y'all. It smells amazing. I'm glad I did that initial taste and upped the ginger. So I'm now gonna strain it. I'm probably not gonna be very graceful about it, so please don't judge me if I spill it. Oh Lord. Okay, we didn't do so bad.
It looks good, Sana. I wish I could smell it also.
It smells divine. I think my brother's gonna creep out of his bedroom any minute.
Did you make 2 cups? He's gonna ask you if you make 2 cups.
I'm gonna give him the rest of this one. This is a big.
So as you're getting that ready, maybe I can ask you another question specifically about Diaspora Co. Just last month, you and your team launched your queer business manifesto and sent it out through your newsletter. You posted on social media. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means for you and your team? And you can drink with us.
Yeah, I mean, I would preface that with saying that, we're a young team. We were 3 people last year. We're 12 people this year. We're learning and growing every day and, changing our opinions on things every day. But when I started the company, I was coming from a place of really feeling like my identities were not visible in the food scene. I was used to working back of house with all the other Black and Brown people. And I was noticing that usually white folks worked front of house and, therefore really were the most visible. Okay, ready with my chai. I'll sit down now. And I mean, in a lot of ways, also as a new immigrant into this country, like I was getting schooled on race and class, like how America works. So, but I did feel that as a queer woman of color, as an immigrant, I wanted to carve out a space for myself where I could bring my whole self to work and where, um, the way Becky from accounting could talk about her engagement, I could talk about my partner or my partner's choice to have top surgery or transition or things like that. So um, I was looking for space, and I felt like the only way to get that space was to create it myself. I think when I started in 2017, I had a very shaky idea of what a queer business meant. I was quite terrified of being canceled again. The commenters in the Munchies Vice community were not kind to Baby Sana. But I think now we have this team of 12 who are kind of in a self-selecting way, like primarily queer people of color, who are really excited about doing this kind of cultural work of reclaiming our spices and reclaiming our cultural background around spices. And it felt important to the entire team as almost an internal exercise, like a culture building exercise of what does it mean to be a queer business? What does that work look like? I can link. Oh, Indra is way ahead of me and has already linked to it. Okay. Um, but yeah, I think we felt that we had an opportunity to lay out a model for other small businesses like ours. We've been really lucky in that we've had a lot of support. We've grown a lot, and I know that a lot of BIPOC founders that look like me often don't make it that far. Even I think there's a statistic like most BIPOC founders in their first 3 years like never make more than $250,000 in revenue. That's a really low number in business. And so we were aware that we've made it quite far, made it a lot further than that statistic. So how can we create a document that guides us and also explains to folks? Like often we get angry emails of like, what does your sexuality have to do with with spices? And we're trying to explain that like it's not about sexuality, it's not about who you're sleeping with or any of those things. It's queerness to us is actually a value system around equity and around liberation, and around care and really taking care of each other and building a business messily in a flawed way. Like we're not putting ourselves as the ideal in any way. That's really rooted in taking care of each other. So that means taking care of our farm partners with healthcare, with paying higher, 6x um, average addition premium on the commodity price. And then it means taking care of the land, which means we only work with partners who are values aligned and growing regeneratively, which often means far beyond organically or what's considered organic here in the US. And then it means taking care of each other as a team and making sure that every single person in our supply chain makes a living wage, and that we're committed to that. Did you only boil the spices without a fat base since you used oat milk? Oh, my oat milk has a lot of fat in it. It's all oil. So my fat base was unfortunately the palm oil in oat milk. So most milks, even nut milks, have a fat. So that's what I was boiling in. But that's how we approached it. And also, I think the big one there is that when I look towards mentors and like look for inspiration of like CEOs I'm inspired by and who else is out there, I don't see any that look like me and that match my identities. And so I wanted to create a bit of a roadmap of like, here's how in my, rambly way I did it. And I hope, 20 more come out next year.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that with us. Um, we don't have any other questions, but I do have, you just talked a little bit about this, about paying your farmers more, making sure they have healthcare and that they're taken care of. And that is really at the heart of the company. I would love if you talked a little bit more about your relationship with the farmers. I love seeing when you're in India, your pictures of the harvest and working with them and sharing meals with them, and kind of what your relationship is with the farmers.
Yeah, it's a close one. So I'm in India, and also my parents are in India. My world is there in a lot of ways. So not like trotting off to a foreign land or anything. Thank you, Dad. Um, but I'm there 4 to 6 months of the year, depending on the year. So I was there January through March of this year, right before COVID got really bad. Um, and I'll be there again September through October. Um, and for me, I think it's very important that we have a close relationship, and our farm partners know that they can call me at any point in time, because I have to remember that yes, I'm Indian, right? And they're Indian too. Okay, we have that in common. But I'm a city girl from Mumbai who didn't visit a farm until I was 21. So like they ultimately, I have to be honest and acknowledge that like their lived experience is profoundly different than mine. And the challenges that they run into in trying to do business with us are ones that I might never have thought of, right? And that's the whole rationale around DEI, right? Is that you will be more successful as a business if like you have a cultural somebody on the team who understands culturally what other folks are going through. More diverse teams get more done. um, so I find that, for example, with our turmeric farmer, um, he was being consistently late on milling and sending me turmeric shipments, and I was getting really frustrated. I was starting to have conversations with my operations manager saying, should we work with somebody else? Like, is this not worth investing in? And finally, I made a visit to him and I said, I really want to work with you. Like, please explain to me what is going on here. And what I didn't understand is that every time he rented a truck to go from his farm to the mill, essentially what was happening is that multiple police agents, government officials were stopping him along the way, seeing a big truck full of produce, seeing like an airway bill, or kind of, which is like a bill permitting the transport from one area to another, one district to another, seeing that, it was being bought at a high price, basically seeing all the information about the purchase and saying, you got to give us a cut. You got to give us 2%, like give us 1%. So this poor guy was having to pay multiple bribes just to get it from his home to the mill and then back home. So in order to avoid that, what he was doing is he was transporting the turmeric in his family's personal car, which is a Maruti 800, which is like the size of my iPhone and how tiny this car is, um, back and forth. And this is thousands of pounds of turmeric in order to avoid those bribes and having to give those bribes. I never would have known that. I never would have. And he was too ashamed to tell me that until I went there and really made the space for him to share that with me. And so immediately the remedy for us and the learning for us is, if we're gonna ask a farmer to mill for us, we need to give them the capital to develop, to create a mill on their property and on their farm. Also begin to give them, and the reason we wanted our farm partners to mill is because then it also creates pride and investment in them to give us the finished product. When you're buying a raw material from a farmer and then you're processing it yourself, they don't know what the finished product tastes like. They don't have pride in like, it was excellent quality this year, or it was a higher curcumin content this year. So we quickly found that, and we also, it meant we could pay our farm partners more if we allowed them to do the processing. So um, having that close relationship has taught us so much. I have really gotten a master class in the trials and tribulations of Indian agriculture in the past 5 years. I'd also never visited Andhra Pradesh before. Now I speak conversational Telugu. So truly a master class. And I think the other part of it is that often our farm partners, like, they'll give me a price that's rooted in what the commodity price, what they know they can sell it for on the market. And I have to kind of talk to them and be like, I understand that that's the commodity price, but that's set just on demand and supply. I want your price to be set in what is your water bill? What is, your labor cost? Are you going to have enough money or enough spices left over to save seed or buy new seed? Um, like do all of that math that I know you do anyway because you're a super competent farmer, but work that into your price, which historically, unfortunately, has never been worked into the price, which is bizarre, right? That farmers are not even thinking about what is the cost of this harvest. They are just having to sell it based on whatever the price the market is offering them, um, which unfortunately is rooted in 200 years of oppression. So it's not a fair price. So we are often telling folks, like, do all the math on that, and then let's add a 20% buffer on it, and then that's the price that we'll pay you. And within a year or two, our farm partners will usually come to us and say, you were right, like that's the price that we needed. We thought you were crazy and we thought that we were cheating you at first. Like I think especially because I'm a young woman showing up on these farms, they're like, oh, this stupid lady, like let's take her for a real ride. They don't realize that I've seen a thing or two. So anyway, I think I went on a tangent. Was that kind of your question,
Yeah,
Chicago?
yes, and that's great. It's great to hear that experience that you have with working with them. So a quick question first before I jump into the one in the Q&A box. It seems you sell out of spices quickly. Are you expanding your suppliers to be able to meet your demand?
Yeah, we are really struggling with that, and it's really been a challenge, quite honestly, because I want to grow at the rate of agriculture, and I want to grow at the rate of delicious, sustainable agriculture, and that's hard. So like our turmeric farmer went from growing 700 pounds his first year working with us to growing 3,000 pounds the second year to growing 6,000 pounds this third year. And then last year growing 11,000 pounds. So like they are scaling to the best of their abilities. And in some areas, we're actually creating cooperatives instead of just one farmer where we feel that we can execute a cooperative in a thoughtful, intentional manner and really give power to the farmers. And there won't be local politics that get involved, but actually it'll be an equitable cooperative. So for example, with our cloves in Sri Lanka, we've developed a cooperative of 30 farms, giving us these like beautiful fire dried cloves that are really plump and fat. So we're working on it, but I don't know if y'all know the story of Belcampo, the Bay Area based meat company, but they were recently, and I love Belcampo, I love the founder, but they were recently caught for um, saying that all of their meat came from their farms, but actually a lot of it was coming from from other farms, and in some cases from Costco. And what happened there was that they took a bunch of venture capital investment, and they they had to scale at a rate that was so fast, and consumers didn't understand that they were literally raising cows, like that takes years. You can't suddenly have more beef. And they were pushed into a corner to the point where they started cutting corners. And I think we are very resistant to that. It's also why we've grown this company without outside capital and without outside investment, because we want to prove the model our way, and we want to create value for our farmers first, before we're beholden to anybody else other than our farm partners.
So I'm going to get into a little bit heavier question that's in the Q&A box.
Farm partner question.
Yeah,
The
did you read it already? I'll
I
read it out
did.
loud
Sure.
so people can hear it. Many of us in the South Asian diaspora are following the brave Sikh farmers' protest and the Modi regime's brutality against Dalits and Muslims in India. What are your hopes for the future of farmers-led protests in India?
Yeah. Firstly, we stand in complete solidarity with them. The Modi administration is fascism in progress, and really, really brutal. And, I say that as a part Gujarati Muslim who saw my family's neighborhood pretty much destroyed during the 2002 riots. So anybody that says that Modi isn't extremely dangerous doesn't know what they're talking about. But um, I actually did an Instagram live on the farmers protest when I was in India in February, and when the farmers protest really reached a fever pitch. So I really recommend y'all going to our Instagram, which is at Diaspora Co, and checking it out. It was an hour long. I did 3 days of research in order to do that live. So it's everything I know about the farmers protests. And yeah, thank you for these really good questions, Sabiha. Um, but I think my hope for the future of farming and protest in India is that there's a deeper understanding of regional and kind of state movements rather than, I think right now the Indian urban population groups farmers together as one big mass of like a farmer in Punjab and a farmer in Bihar must have the same experience. Bihar is one of the poorest states in India. Punjab is one of the most wealthy states in India. And a Punjabi farmer, so, okay, to give you guys an example, a Punjabi farmer might earn a monthly revenue of 23,000 rupees. Yeah, sounds like a large number. In dollars, it's not. It's about $500 or $400. A Bihari farmer might earn a monthly revenue from agriculture of 3,000 rupees. And you're thinking, well, that's crazy. Like, why is the Punjabi farmer earning so much more? But the Bihari farmer has no inputs, has no labor, has no debt, doesn't have to buy seed. So almost everything that they're earning is going straight back to them. The Punjabi farmer, because of the Green Revolution, because of kind of the industrialization of agriculture in the 60s and the 70s, that was rooted in this idea of like, we need to feed the world, we need to feed a growing country. Um, they have huge water bills, huge labor bills, huge machinery debt because they're all industrial agriculture that was encouraged upon them by the government. So, the solution for Punjab is completely different than the solution for Bihar or the solution for Maharashtra. So, this idea of enacting broad, sweeping policy on a national level is highly flawed. It does, I mean, that's like comparing an Idaho potato farmer to a California coast strawberry farmer and saying that they deserve the same legislation. That doesn't make sense. So, one, I hope that the future of Indian protest is free and that they're allowed to protest and they're not silenced and hurt, and their safety isn't compromised. They're allowed to protest freely. That's part of the Indian Constitution that I know and that my ancestors fought for, being from a mixed but mostly Muslim origin. Um, and then beyond that, I think it's that farmers recognize that the current system, like, I don't believe that the current agricultural system in India is serving farmers, but I also don't believe that it should be completely pulled out from under them by the government without any, pilot programs or trials or, implementing things in batches. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. The Instagram Live is pretty helpful. I could go on for hours and hours, but there is a movement across India right now called ZBNF, Zero Budget Natural Farming. And it's a farming method that's very regenerative, that's truly zero budgets. The whole idea is that it requires zero inputs. Like, you can create fertilizer, pesticides, everything using things you already grow and have on your farm. All you need is a good rotation of crops and 2 cows, and it's really growing across the country. And I think it's the future, especially for a more climate change resilient model. Already out of our 40-ish farm partners, I'd say half are contending with the effects of climate change already in dramatic, devastating ways. So any model that encourages climate resilience is one that I advocate for.
Thank you. So we have 3 minutes left. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with us, or anything else you want to add that you haven't talked about yet?
I haven't talked about how nasty the current spice trade is in terms of deliciousness and flavor, and I think that's important to get into, which is that the spices in your grocery store. So, like, this was in my brother's cabinet, and I turned my nose up at it. I thought it was terrible, but it probably left the farm anywhere from 3 to 7 years ago. 3 would be very generous. 7 is more likely. which means that in terms of like aroma, this does not smell like much, and it has the potential to smell like a lot more. Most of its active compounds, which is um, the oil content in here has gone bye-bye. So my big thing is try a spice that was grown the same year. Our company is probably the only company in the country, or is definitely the only company in the country that publishes harvest date, milling date, and best by date on every single jar you receive. And is that a pain in the ass? Yes. I wish that I didn't have to post those things, but does it create a transparency and a quality standard that hasn't existed before? Also, yes. And it means that what you're getting is so much more delicious and flavorful. I mean, we have people who smell our ginger powder and are just like, I didn't know that ginger powder was supposed to have a smell. And this is perfume. Like I would want to put it on my body. Same with turmeric, same with cardamom. Like fresh spices make a world of a difference. And most spices over the past 200 years have been grown for how long they can be stored and how little they can be damaged over years of transit. So we are really working with our farm partners to say, we don't care about like yield and storability. I mean, we at the baseline care about it, but not really. We care about how delicious is it. You know, are you growing the seed variety that's creating the most delicious spice out there? And creating a spice that has, you know, a high oil content, which means more aroma and more flavor. And that's what we'll pay you a premium for. So, and it's the same as, you know, farmers who are now farming heirloom tomatoes because they're more delicious rather than your Walgreens kind of dead of winter commodity tomato. So, anyway, I think that's my rundown. I think we can stop there. Thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate it. And yeah, you can go to the Diaspora Co website right now. If you order a 6-pack, most stuff is on pre-order right now. But we will be selling a chai masala in time for the holidays, so stay tuned. But you can order a 6-pack off all of the spices that you need to make this exact chai.
Thanks so much, Sana. We want to thank you for making chai with us and talking a little bit more about your company and your values as a person and as someone who runs a big business. And so we are just really thankful to you for being here and partnering with us on this program. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. Oh, yeah. Everybody, thank you for the nice comments.